Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're tackling a story so immense, so impactful, it literally redrew the map of the world. We're talking about a company that started with a handful of ships and ended up ruling an entire subcontinent. This is the story of the East India Company, when trade became empire. It all begins on the very last day of the year 1600. While London was celebrating the turn of the century, Queen Elizabeth I signed a royal charter. This charter granted a group of merchants, officially named the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies, a monopoly on all English trade east of the Cape of Good Hope. Their goal? To get a piece of the incredibly lucrative spice trade, which was then dominated by the Dutch and Portuguese. Think about it. In the 17th century, spices like pepper, cloves, and nutmeg were worth more than their weight in gold. They weren't just for flavor, they were status symbols, preservatives, and even thought to have medicinal properties. The company's first voyages were risky but incredibly profitable. Their ships, laden with English wool and metals, sailed for months, battling storms, pirates, and rival European powers, all for a chance to trade for spices in places like modern-day Indonesia. Early on, they established small trading posts, called factories, not because they manufactured anything, but because they were run by factors, or agents. The first major one was in Surat, on the west coast of India, established in 1612. This wasn't an invasion, it was a business deal. The company had to get permission from the powerful Mughal emperors who ruled most of India. An English ambassador, Sir Thomas Roe, spent years at the Mughal court, finally securing a treaty that allowed the company to trade and establish factories in exchange for providing the emperor with goods and rarities from Europe. For the first century and a half, the East India Company was, for the most part, just that, a company. A very, very rich company, but a trading company nonetheless. They were guests in a vast and powerful empire. Their main focus shifted from spices in the East Indies to Indian textiles. Calico, chintz, and fine muslin fabrics from India became the height of fashion in Europe. The demand was insatiable. The company's profits soared, and its shareholders, many of them powerful figures in British politics, became fantastically wealthy. These trading posts at Surat, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta were tiny European bubbles on the edge of the massive Indian subcontinent. The company had its own private security guards, but they were no match for the might of the Mughal Empire. So, what changed? How did this trading company transform into a conquering colonial power? The key turning point was the decline of the Mughal Empire in the 18th century. After the death of the powerful Emperor Aurangzeb in 1707, the empire began to fracture. Local governors and princes started asserting their independence, fighting amongst themselves for territory and power. India became a patchwork of competing states. This political vacuum created chaos, but for the East India Company, it also created an opportunity. At the same time, the rivalry between Britain and France was heating up globally, a conflict that played out in India as well. The French had their own East India Company, and both sides began backing different Indian princes in local conflicts, offering them money and modern European military training in exchange for commercial advantages. This is where Robert Clive enters the scene. A brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless company clerk turned military leader. In 1757, at the Battle of Plassey, Clive led a small force of about 3,000 company soldiers against the nearly 50,000-strong army of the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah. It shouldn't have been a contest, but Clive had a secret weapon: conspiracy. He had secretly bribed one of the Nawab's key commanders, Mir Jafar, who promised to have his soldiers stand down during the battle. The battle was a ridiculously one-sided victory for the company. Siraj-ud-Dowlah was overthrown and executed, and Clive installed the traitor Mir Jafar as a puppet ruler. This was the game changer. The Battle of Plassey gave the company control over the immense wealth of Bengal, the richest province in India. They were no longer just traders asking for permission, they were the kingmakers. They gained the right to collect taxes, the Diwani, from Bengal. Suddenly, the company had access to a vast, seemingly endless stream of revenue, which they could use to fund their own private army. They didn't even need to bring money from Britain anymore. They could use Indian money to buy Indian goods and fund their Indian conquests. With Bengal's riches funding its expansion, the company's private army grew into one of the most formidable military forces in the world, larger and more powerful than the British Army itself. It was composed mainly of Indian soldiers known as sepoys, led by British officers. Over the next few decades, through a combination of direct conquest, manipulative treaties, and strategic alliances, the company expanded its control. They fought and defeated powerful Indian kingdoms like the Marathas and the Kingdom of Mysore. Rulers who allied with the company found themselves trapped in a subsidiary alliance, a clever system where they had to pay for the protection of company troops stationed in their territory. The cost was so high that they would inevitably fall into debt, forcing them to give up more and more of their land to the company. Bit by bit, piece by piece, the Indian subcontinent fell under the control of a private corporation. That this rule by a company was brutal and exploitative. The primary goal was not good governance, it was profit for its shareholders back in London. Company officials, known as nabobs, made enormous personal fortunes through corruption and plunder. The devastating Bengal famine of 1770, where up to a third of the population died, was made worse by the company's harsh tax policies and indifference. Back in Britain, there was growing unease. How could a private company command armies, wage wars, and govern millions of people? It was a situation without precedent. The British Parliament began to step in, passing acts to regulate the company's activities and curb its power. The final act in the company's story came in 1857. The Indian Rebellion, often called the Sepoy Mutiny, was a massive, widespread uprising against company rule. It was sparked by a rumor that the cartridges for the new Enfield rifle, which sepoys had to bite open, were greased with pig and cow fat, offensive to both Muslim and Hindu soldiers. But the causes ran much deeper. Decades of aggressive expansion, economic exploitation, and a growing disregard for Indian customs and traditions. The rebellion was violent and bloody on both sides and shook the British Empire to its core. Although the British eventually crushed the rebellion, it spelled the end for the East India Company. The British government decided that it could no longer allow a private company to govern such a vast territory. In 1858, the British Crown took direct control. India was no longer ruled by a corporation. It was now the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, and Queen Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India. The East India Company, the corporate entity that had conquered a continent, was formally dissolved in 1874, its assets absorbed by the crown. It faded away, a ghost of its former self. The legacy of the East India Company is complex and controversial. It laid the foundations of the British Raj, connected India to the global economy in an unprecedented way, and built railways, telegraph lines, and a modern bureaucracy, much of which was designed to facilitate extraction and control. But it did so through violence, exploitation, and the destruction of local industries. It is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked corporate power and a crucial chapter in understanding the modern world, the rise of global capitalism, and the complex history between Britain and India. The story of a company that, for a time, became an empire. Thank you so much for watching. This is a huge topic, and we've only scratched the surface. What part of this history do you find most fascinating? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next one.